And one more thing before I wrap up, because I do want to get to these meetings and I will see you all at the EO signing later this afternoon. I would just say that you brought to mind California and North Carolina, who continue to be on our hearts, and the president and this administration are committed.
The president's offer to buy out more than 2 million federal employees. For that and much more, joining us now is White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Karoline, thank you so much for joining us this morning here on GMA.
The press conference began with an air of tension as Trump's press secretary took the podium in front of a room full of eager journalists. It was no ordinary briefing. This was a direct response to mounting protests from LGBTQ plus activist groups who had been voicing their discontent with the administration's policies.
Morning, Michael. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me on the program. This is another promise made and kept by President Trump. He told the American people on the campaign trail that he was going to make our federal government more efficient and productive.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
Press secretary wasted no time, delivering a no-holds-barred statement that immediately grabbed national attention, addressing the controversial protests head-on and challenging the narrative that had been building for weeks. The LGBTQ plus protests had intensified over recent months, as activists decried Trump's policies on transgender rights, healthcare, and military service. With demonstrations escalating outside government buildings and social media buzzing with condemnation, the administration was under increasing pressure. The press secretary's words were designed to set the record straight and defend the administration's stance, particularly its commitment to what it deemed as protecting traditional values and safeguarding taxpayer funds from being used for what it called misguided programs. This moment became a turning point in the ongoing debate, as the press secretary's speech sparked a nationwide conversation about the direction of America's political landscape and the growing divide over LGBTQ+ rights. Activists and journalists were stunned by the directness of the response, setting the stage for the fierce battles that would follow in both the media and the courts. As the press secretary laid out the administration's case, it became clear that the conflict wasn't just about protests. It was rooted in deeper ideological differences that had been brewing for years. The root of the conflict: what sparked this clash?
For the last few decades, the story of LGBTQ+ rights in America has been one of increasing public support. But now a new survey finds that for the first time in years, there's a slight decline in that support. William Brangham takes a closer look.
The conflict between the LGBTQ+ activists and the Trump administration can be traced back to the refusal of the administration to accommodate several key demands from activist groups. LGBTQ+ rights organizations had long pushed for policies that would expand protections for transgender individuals, such as access to gender-affirming healthcare and the right to serve in the military without discrimination. The administration, however, framed these demands as part of a larger pattern of federal overreach that was undermining states' rights and individual freedoms. At the heart of the clash were recent executive orders that had sparked outrage among LGBTQ+ groups. One executive order, which reversed an Obama-era policy allowing transgender individuals to serve openly in the military, was met with immediate protests. Similarly, other policies limiting the scope of transgender rights in healthcare and education became flashpoints for activists who argued that the Trump administration was deliberately eroding hard-won rights for the LGBTQ+ community. The administration, however, argued that these policies were designed to balance religious freedom with individual rights and to prevent the imposition of what they saw as a progressive agenda on the entire country. Trump's administration framed the debate as one about preserving constitutional limits and the principles of federalism. By rejecting the activists' demands, the administration argued that it was ensuring that power remained with individual states and that local governments had the right to determine policies based on their own values and circumstances. This stance, while applauded by conservative groups, was seen as a direct affront to those fighting for national recognition of LGBTQ+ rights. With these deep ideological divides established, the press secretary's bold challenge to activists was an attempt to bring the issue into the national spotlight and reframe the entire debate around values, rights, and federalism. The press secretary's direct challenge to activists.
And Karoline Leavitt isn't just making headlines, she's also rewriting history. At 27, the New Hampshire native has become the youngest White House press secretary ever. A staunch Trump loyalist and unapologetic Gen Z conservative, Leavitt's sharp rhetoric and bold social media presence have already made waves.
press secretary's statements during the press conference were nothing short of incendiary. Not only did she defend the administration's policies, but she also directly challenged the LGBTQ+ activists, accusing them of misrepresenting the facts and using fear tactics to push their political agenda. The room fell silent as she outlined the administration's position, contrasting the approach to LGBTQ+ policies under the Trump administration with the more lenient stance taken by the previous Obama administration. One of the key moments of the speech came when the press secretary slammed the Biden administration for what she called empty promises to LGBTQ+ activists. She argued that Biden's executive orders on LGBTQ+ rights had done little to address the real issues faced by the community and had instead created an environment of divisiveness. She framed the debate as one where the Trump administration was striving to protect religious freedoms while the Biden administration was eager to appease activist groups at the expense of traditional values and taxpayer money. As the press conference unfolded, the response from LGBTQ+ activists and their allies was swift and furious, with protests and backlash erupting across the nation. The battle over federal funding: where does the money go?
Breaking this morning, this sweeping, unprecedented order that puts a pause to all federal grants and loans at 5 p.m. today. This could be trillions of dollars in funding that impacts programs and people in the United States and around the world, things like disaster aid, aid for medical charities, food assistance programs.
On day one, I will sign a new executive order to cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content onto our children.
A major point of contention during the press conference was the discussion over federal funding and how taxpayer dollars were being spent on controversial programs. The press secretary highlighted the billions of dollars allocated to initiatives she claimed were being misused, particularly in foreign countries where the U.S. was spending money on programs related to LGBTQ+ rights, sex changes, and tourism in nations with questionable human rights records.
And I would just say a strong message to Democrats who are out there pretending to be outraged about the long list of crap that this administration is cutting, federal waste and funding, like $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt, $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. I could go on, and I'm happy to provide this list to every single one of you.
One of the most startling claims made was the allocation of $2 million in taxpayer dollars for sex change operations in Guatemala, alongside another $6 million spent on promoting tourism in Egypt, a country known for its harsh stance against LGBTQ+ rights. The press secretary's comments ignited outrage, with critics accusing the administration of mismanaging taxpayer dollars by funding programs that did not align with American values. The administration, however, framed these expenditures as part of a broader effort to promote global human rights, albeit with a controversial focus on areas that were not immediately seen as priorities by critics. With this charge of fiscal mismanagement hanging in the air, the LGBTQ+ activists' response was swift and unrelenting, leading to protests and an intense social media backlash. LGBTQ+ activists react, outrage, protests, and social media backlash.
On the campaign trail, Trump has been talking about what he plans to do if elected in November, and that includes rolling back the rights of millions of LGBTQ people. It's part of a wider playbook to undo many modern civil rights advances for minority groups.
The speech ignited a firestorm of criticism from LGBTQ+ organizations, who immediately condemned the press secretary's statements as discriminatory and harmful. Major advocacy groups, including the Human Rights Campaign and GLAAD, issued scathing rebukes, accusing the Trump administration of using the LGBTQ+ community as a political scapegoat in a broader culture war. For activists, the speech was not just an attack on policies they had fought for, but an attempt to roll back the progress made in recent years. Protests erupted outside the White House and in cities across the country, with demonstrators chanting for equal rights and condemning what they saw as an administration willing to sacrifice the well-being of LGBTQ+ individuals for political gain. The streets became battlegrounds where messages of resistance were shouted, and activists rallied against what they viewed as a blatant attack on their rights. Social media erupted in a storm of tweets, videos, and posts, with the hashtag number LGBTQ resistance trending for days following the press conference. As protests and online backlash mounted, the legal challenges began to take shape, with activists gearing up for what could be a lengthy and contentious battle in the courts. The legal battle: what happens next?
With the military, we're ending woke immediately. You know, I ended woke, totally. And then in their first week, they reestablished it. It's crazy. They pay instructors hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It literally, they want our military to be woke.
In the aftermath of the press conference, LGBTQ plus activists began organizing to challenge the Trump administration's policies in court. Legal groups swiftly filed lawsuits accusing the administration of violating the constitutional rights of LGBTQ plus individuals. The focus of these lawsuits was the executive orders that had rolled back protections for transgender individuals in military service and healthcare, as well as the administration's refusal to provide protections for LGBTQ plus people in employment discrimination cases. Trump's legal team, however, was prepared for the battle ahead. The administration has long argued that its executive orders are grounded in constitutional principles, particularly in regard to religious freedom and states' rights. Legal experts for the Trump administration are expected to fight back aggressively, using the Constitution and federal law to defend the policies and push back against what they see as attempts by the courts to impose a progressive agenda. As legal proceedings began, the press secretary's controversial statements remained fresh in the minds of both journalists and activists, with the media framing the speech as a key turning point in the culture war. The press secretary's most controversial statements.
And one more thing before I wrap up, because I do want to get to these meetings and I will see you all at the EO signing later this afternoon. I would just say that you brought to mind California and North Carolina, who continue to be on our hearts, and the president and this administration are committed to ensuring that these individuals get the funding that they need. And I would just say a strong message to Democrats who are out there pretending to be outraged about the long list of crap that this administration is cutting, federal waste and funding, like $2 million for sex changes.
The press secretary's remarks were not just political, they were deeply personal, targeting both LGBTQ plus activists and the media. Some of the sharpest statements came when she referred to the policies of previous administrations, particularly the Obama-era decisions that were seen as enabling the progressive agenda on LGBTQ plus rights. She painted Obama's policies as an example of federal overreach, claiming that they sought to force a liberal agenda on the American public, undermining traditional values and freedoms. The most controversial part of the speech was when the press secretary accused the media of actively participating in the promotion of LGBTQ plus rights at the expense of other issues. She argued that journalists were too eager to push a progressive agenda, skewing the narrative to benefit a small group of activists at the cost of millions of Americans who held different views on marriage, family, and gender. This direct counterattack against the media struck a nerve, particularly among liberal journalists, who accused her of distorting the facts to fit a right-wing narrative. Transition. The rhetoric surrounding the speech only fueled the growing divide, and as the battle intensified, the national conversation shifted from policy to the larger cultural implications. The larger debate, what this means for American culture. The speech marked a pivotal moment in the larger cultural debate over LGBTQ plus rights, with profound implications for the direction of American society. Critics of the Trump administration saw the speech as a direct assault on civil rights, while supporters hailed it as a necessary defense of traditional values. The divide was clear. On one side, a growing movement advocating for the recognition and rights of LGBTQ plus individuals, and on the other, a conservative push to protect what they saw as the foundational principles of American culture. For many, this debate wasn't just about LGBTQ plus rights. It was about something deeper, the vision of what America should stand for. Is this a fight to preserve traditional gender roles and family structures, or is it an attack on the civil rights of an entire community? The Trump administration, in its defense of these policies, framed the battle as one about protecting religious freedom, the sanctity of the family, and the rights of states to determine their own policies. With the cultural war heating up, the role of the media became increasingly critical in shaping the public's perception of these divisive issues. The role of media, biased coverage, or fair reporting. The press conference sparked an immediate battle over media coverage, with the mainstream media and conservative outlets offering starkly different interpretations of the events. For liberal news organizations, the press secretary's remarks were seen as a brazen attempt to undermine the LGBTQ plus community, while conservative media outlets praised the speech for pushing back against what they perceived as a liberal agenda. This division raised serious questions about the objectivity of journalism and whether the media was acting as an unbiased referee or a partisan advocate for one side. For many conservative commentators, commentators, the press conference provided an opportunity to call out what they saw as a media bias that had been promoting a progressive narrative. The charge was that mainstream outlets were often too quick to support LGBTQ+ causes, even at the expense of other important issues such as religious freedoms and states' rights. Conservative news outlets, however, argued that they were simply presenting the facts as they were, standing firm in their belief that the media had long been complicit in shaping public opinion to align with a specific set of political values. As the media continued to spin the narrative, the debate quickly turned to the impact this controversy would have on the upcoming election, with both sides preparing for a fight that would shape political strategies for years to come. How this will shape the 2024 election. The press conference and the controversies surrounding the Trump administration's LGBTQ+ policies are poised to have a significant impact on the 2024 election. For Trump and his supporters, the press conference was a rallying cry, solidifying their position as defenders of traditional American values in the face of a progressive movement they viewed as out of touch with the average American. The speech energized Trump's conservative base, providing them with a clear message to rally around. The fight for family values and religious freedoms was far from over. Meanwhile, the backlash from LGBT+ activists and progressive groups could work to mobilize liberal voters heading into the election. Democrats have been quick to capitalize on the controversy, using it to highlight what they argue are the harmful consequences of Trump's policies on marginalized communities. The speech and the subsequent protests may galvanize the LGBTQ+ community and their allies, who see this as a defining moment in the battle for civil rights. The emotional nature of the debate ensures that it will not only energize voters, but also become a central talking point in the election cycle. With the election looming, the question remains, will the Trump administration continue to double down on these policies, or will they pivot in response to increasing opposition from activists, the media, and the courts? What happens next? Will Trump's team double down? As the 2024 election draws closer, all eyes will be on Trump's team to see whether they continue to double down on the controversial policies that have sparked such intense backlash from LGBTQ+ activists and their allies. The press secretary's speech made it clear that the administration was not backing down from its stance, but with mounting protests, lawsuits, and media scrutiny, the question remains whether the administration will adjust its approach or stay the course. Future executive orders could further intensify the ongoing battle, particularly as the Trump team continues to frame these issues through the lens of religious freedom, states' rights, and fiscal conservatism. If the administration continues to push forward with its stance on transgender rights, healthcare, and military service, it could trigger even more protests and legal challenges, forcing the courts to intervene once again. The administration's approach will likely be influenced by political calculations, weighing the potential political gain with the risk of alienating moderates and swing voters. The debate over LGBTQ+ rights, traditional values, and government intervention is one of the most heated in recent American history. Where do you stand on this issue? Was Trump's press secretary right to shut down the activists, or was this a step too far in the wrong direction? As the nation continues to grapple with these divisive issues, your voice matters. Comment below, like, and subscribe for more updates on this ongoing story. Stay tuned as we follow the legal battles, political developments, and cultural shifts surrounding this contentious issue, and get involved in the conversation shaping America's future.